Presentation of dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho. By the Friends of Idaho Public Television, by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the Idaho Public Television Endowment.
In order to be a grown-up, you have to be able to incorporate in yourself everything that went wrong as well as everything that went right.
Coming up, part 2 of my interview with award-winning author Barry Lopez. We talk about the guiding philosophy of his memoir, Horizon, and what's next on his own horizon. And Lopez shares a very personal experience that has influenced his life. That's Dialogue next. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. Today, part 2 of my conversation with Barry Lopez from the 2019 Sun Valley Writers Conference. The author of more than 15 works of fiction and nonfiction, Lopez won the National Book Award in 1986 for Arctic Dreams. His book Of Wolves and Men was a finalist for the National Book Award in 1980. His latest book is a memoir called Horizon. In it, he takes readers to 6 regions of the world he's explored. Our conversation lasted more than an hour, a free-ranging look at both Lopez's past and his hopes for the future. So I decided it would make an interesting 2-part dialogue. In the first episode, Lopez reflected on why it took 30 years to work on his memoir, his writing style, and some of the ethical challenges he's faced. In this second part, he talks more about the rhythm of Horizon and what's next on his own horizon. And he shares a very personal experience that has shaped his life both as a writer and as a human being. First, though, I asked Lopez who he thinks the best people are to solve some of the most pressing issues facing our planet. You have said that not everyone that needs to be at the table is at the table. Correct. To help make these critical decisions about what we're going to do before this horizon hits us. Who would you like to see at that table?
I wouldn't name any particular person that I would like to see there. What I would like to see is fully mature people.
How do you define that, fully mature? Age or?
It's a person who doesn't need to be supervised. It's a person who doesn't have to be watched to make sure they make a decision on behalf of other people that's good for everybody. A person who makes decisions for personal gain remains a child. You have to watch over them and correct them and restrain them. Otherwise, they'll make a ruinous situation for a lot of people.
But somebody's making that decision about who's mature and who's not. They themselves may not be mature, the ones who are making that decision. Do you think that there's certain groups of people that need to be at the table in general, or?
Yes, what historically are called elders, not older people, but people who they can sit in a room at a table with 5 people and listen to and actually understand all 5 people. And they can intuit that what that person just said is going to be misunderstood by that person. And that conflict is going to keep us from moving toward a viable solution to our problem. So the elder is the full grown-up. The elder also embodies the history of their own community or their own people. I would say among the characteristics of elders are that they take life more seriously. They relate in a way to children that is not patronizing and not condescending. They'll talk for an hour without using the vertical pronoun, as some people call it. They're not in it if life is it. They're not in it for themselves. They're in it for others. In order to be a grown-up, you have to be able to incorporate in yourself everything that went wrong as well as everything that went right. Otherwise, your decisions are not well informed. And this country has an enormous problem with the denial of slavery and the denial of genocide. We just look the other way or pretend it didn't happen, or that the economy wasn't founded on the backs of black people, or that somehow Indians weren't actually living in the world that we took for ourselves. It's a different question than was it right or wrong. It's a question about history and your ability to maintain an ethical position with regard to everything, not just the things that you think went right. In traditional societies, nobody ever runs to be an elder. It's a thankless task because you often propose adjustments to various kinds of social pressures and need for food, all that kind of stuff, that are not popular. So, you know, it's the old business of some older people know better than most younger people because of their experience and because, if you will, in the vernacular, they've gotten over themselves. They're not considering themselves wise, informed, important people. And in a traditional setting, they're elected every day. Every day, the same group of 50 or 100 or whatever it is say, that's the woman, that's the one, whatever she says, I'll do that. And that's the sign of a society that's stable throughout centuries because they support the people that everybody knows are the really bright people.
Let's get back to the book. This has been germinating, so to speak, for 30 years.
Yeah.
5 years ago, you decide, okay, now's the time. I'm going to start making the drafts. Was there something prompting that decision 5 years ago?
Not really.
Okay, there wasn't something in, you know, all the talk about global climate change, for instance, that provoked you?
No, it was not at all.
It was just, you felt that you were at a maturation level to do it. You had enough information to...
I had a big enough meal and I had to digest it, you know. With this book, with Horizon, there's a certain amount of embarrassment attached to the fact that you you signed a contract 25 years ago and you're still, what are you doing? You know, I was writing other books and writing for magazines and things like that, but I felt that, you know, you can't trust him or something like that. But
the sword of Damocles.
Right, the sword of Damocles right there just grazing the neck.
How did you decide, I'm sure you've been asked this before, but how did you decide which regions to put in? I mean, I read even 30 years ago, again, you had kind of an idea of what you'd narrow it down to.
So much of what goes through my mind is music and spatial geography. And one day in my living room, I was sitting just doing this with the globe, staring out the window, and I saw, because there are two axes to the globe, you can turn the thing this way or you can turn it this way. And so I was playing with that motion in my mind and using my hands to wonder, so if I was right here in Saudi Arabia, what would be on the other side, what the antipodes would be? And that's when I saw this, I hope, graceful movement that went from the high Arctic once around the equator but ended up in Antarctica, but still at the so-called top of the world, not the bottom of the world.
Did you hear a symphony too?
I think I actually did. You know, a friend of mine, a composer, John Luther Adams, who won the Pulitzer a couple of years ago, said that when he read the book. He said, this is symphonic in structure and in tone, which was a huge compliment, but it also gave language to something that I felt and would not know how to have said. I just thought of this, and this is probably very important. There's a kind of landscape photography that eliminates people. And there is another kind of photography that shows people integrated into the landscape. And even though I go to periodically very remote places, I'm writing about people. And I'm interested in how people fit their places. What is the dynamic here between people, the made environment, and the natural environment, or a group of people and the natural environment? Where is the intimacy? Where is the thing that makes us feel whole? People crave intimacy. They want the reassurance, the warmth, the thrill of intimate relationship with a book, with a person, or whatever it is. But to have an intimate relationship, you have to be vulnerable. You have to be vulnerable to that part of the world or the person or whatever it is. And to become vulnerable, you have to trust. And we've created a world in which many people feel they're just not ready to trust very much at all. I know what I'm after, which is, why are you here? And so I need to get to know you, and I need to get to know here. And I'm more, I have a frame of mind in which my starting point is always a clean stage and a few people, and then they start moving. That's how it all starts to work for me. In order for me to make the kind of music that language can make, I have to have a stage that's easy for me to define parts and then start pushing them around and making the dynamic that we call drama.
You've mentioned that writing this book was in part to try and understand why you have traveled so much.
Right.
You know, whether you were trying to escape something or
Right.
what the reason was. Did you come to any conclusion about what drives Barry Lopez and what has for over 50 years to travel?
Probably, but probably some of that was very private. You know, and to say, what happened to this person when they were a child, and how can we move 40 years later and see how this is a response to that or a compensation of some sort? I think everybody has that sense of the private life being opened up later when you're strong enough to manage the insights. My intention, which doesn't mean what I accomplished, but my intention was to interrogate myself and say, so now you have traveled to 70 countries and you've dived under the ice in Antarctica and traveled with Eskimos in the high Arctic and with Aboriginal people across the desert. What for? Were you just off on a lark, or just having fun, or did you do anything serious so that somebody who was not able to do that can vicariously participate? Did you offer the reader anything of substance for the indulgence of your carbon footprint or whatever it is? Whether I did that or not, I hope I did. But yes, I did have the intention to interrogate myself about it cost the world and people a certain amount to propel you into the life that you've had. So you owe, in some way, you must say, what did you see? It's like we sent you out and you've come back, and do you have anything of substance to say? Or are you just going to tell us, I went to 70 countries, I did this, I did that? Really, who cares? You know, you can't get very far by trying to impress somebody with all the places you've been, but you can get a good relationship with a reader by doing it this way. Here's what I saw, described as well as I can describe it. What do you think? That's it. So I want to leave the book or the essay or whatever by saying, what do you think?
And the result of your interrogation, are you at peace?
Well, not ever really. I am now that the horizon is out, and I've at the end of book tour. What am I going to do now? I have some health issues I've got to consider. I've got this question that you've raised about your carbon footprint from flying all over the world all the time. I don't know what's next. I could tell you one thing I'm going to do. A very close friend of mine died 2 years ago. He died anonymously, but he radically changed my life. I wrote him in 1975. I said that I'd read a very impressive paper he'd written about wolves and his experience with wolves in the Brooks Range with Nunamiut Eskimo people, and that a man named Bob Akok had written the paper with him. I thought for somebody to go into another culture and make this inquiry about wolves, that it was very impressive. So I wrote him a letter and said, "Can I come and talk to you?" And he said, "Yes." And I went in March of '76. I went to Alaska. 3 days later, I was in a helicopter radio collaring wolves. That's because Alaska, it's a cowboy kind of environment. You could do something like that. And I realized, reflecting later in my life, I began publishing work in 1966, and I went there in 1976, and that's where I saw what I would call the big work. I saw Of Wolves and Men, I saw Arctic Dreams, I actually saw the beginnings of Horizon. And so I must thank that man in a formal way. So I want to go back up to Alaska and interview the people who knew him, many of whom are no longer with us, and I want to engage that debt and write about that man and what he contributed to our general knowledge of the world.
And his name? His
name was Bob Stevenson. He was a wolf biologist with Alaska Fish and Game. He later went on to work with lynx, and at the end of his life, he was successful in bringing wood bison back to Alaska. But as I say, like so many people, he lived a worthy life, and when he was gone, not very many people missed him, and others did not even know he was here. And that is the story for most people. You work your whole life, you try to make something beautiful, you try to do your work well, and at the end, somebody should come to you and say, "Thank you. Thank you for what you gave us," and on we go. And I feel that need to go and do that for that man. There are a couple of other things that I want to finish a collection of essays, and I've got 3 or 4 things that are roughly outlined in my head that I want to do. But except for the trip to Alaska, I seem to be thinking more about things that will require no distant travel. When I was a child, I spent, unfortunately in some ways, but fortunately in others, I spent years in a tangle of traumatic sexual abuse.
Right.
And I couldn't write about it except very peripherally until 8 years ago. And by that time, I understood enough about myself as a writer to know that I could go into this as a writer with a research project. Here's the writer, here's the wolf. Here's the writer, here's Antarctica. Here's the writer, and here's traumatic sexual abuse. I understood it from the point of view of the psychology of it, but I also thought I could report it with firsthand knowledge and write something that would make people who had been through that experience feel known, visible, safer in the world. They weren't crazy. They weren't horrible people. So writing that story was my focused effort to say, this is one of the things that happens to us. I'm okay now, and I hope if this happened to you that you're okay. And here are a few things to look at that might help you organize the history of memories of your trauma.
And have you heard from people?
Hundreds of people. And that was about half the story of that period of my life. It was too much to try to put in one article. So another piece that I want to go and write is the second half of that story of traumatic childhood abuse. To talk about traumatic sexual abuse as a child is to talk about the things that drive people to their knees in their adult life. And My point of view is that whether you pick it up right away or later, virtually every woman and man has been driven to their knees by something. Financial failure, broken marriage, whatever it is. And for them, they don't need to have gone through sexual trauma in order to understand this happened to me. Metaphorically, this happened to me. And if you write the story well enough, it doesn't matter what the trauma was. What matters is, can I still come back to life? Can I still function? Can I get to a place where I feel I'm a graceful person in the world? Can I reclaim a sense of self-worth? Can I be a contributor? Can I love? And can I get through this wall so that I am capable of being loved, of receiving love? So without being, it doesn't, it's a difficult thing to talk about because your responsibility historically as a storyteller is to, well, here's in Inuktitut, which is the language spoken by Inuit people, their word for storyteller is isumutak, and it means the person who creates the atmosphere in which wisdom reveals itself. It's not about we don't need the writer, we don't need the storyteller, we need the story. And this story creates this atmosphere that is technically, skillfully created by the storyteller or by the writer. Wisdom emerges and I understand myself better. Wisdom emerges, and instead of having this incoherent noise in my head, I feel coherent, I know what I want to do with my life, and I value myself more than I did before I read this story.
So it's about giving people hope in a way.
And all of us need that. All of us need substantial. It has to be substantial. It can't be Pollyanna and life will be better tomorrow. It can't be that rubbish. It's got to be believable. Trying to do that is very different from having a career. You know, I have a way of life, and my way of life is a storyteller. Whether the book is a bestseller or you get this medal or what, that's not what it's about. It's the responsibility that you have taken on is to take care of people, to do the things that help people take care of themselves, to say, this happened to me, so I'm not making this up about having been in a dark place. I'm okay now, and I want you to be okay. And here are the things that I did that metaphorically you can see what you can do to take care of yourself. And I just want to hug you and say thanks for reading the book or whatever it is and disappear.
And it sounds like you have hope for humanity right now to reimagine or redream that horizon.
I do. You can get caught up in all of these tangles about democracy or socialism or this or that or the other. Which way do we go, you know? But I knew at one point in my life that I had a privileged life. And because I did, I was missing a lot of things. I was missing the daily nightmare that so many people live with. And with a friend's help, who runs a large NGO, I said, I want to travel and try to understand plight. So we put a travel schedule together. I went to Lebanon and was in Beirut for a while. I wanted to see the cedars of Lebanon. I want to actually see those trees. I wanted to be on the Israeli border. I went on to Tajikistan, which at that time was the most impoverished of the old Soviet republics. Went on to Afghanistan.
Bamiyan, right?
To Bamiyan, yeah. where the Buddhas were. I knew if I got there and I saw the empty niches and the shattered rock that was the Buddhas, I'd begin to understand what it means to lose faith or to have your faith crushed. And then I ended that trip in northern Sumatra in Banda Aceh province after the tsunami that killed 225,000 people in about 20 minutes. And when I got to Jakarta, and I was there, how did you put your family back together? You lost everybody. How did you get back on your feet? And I called my wife from Jakarta and I said, I have more faith in humanity now than when I got off the plane in Beirut. It has nothing to do with government, nothing to do with religion. It is this tremendous capacity that human beings have to take care of each other. And there are floating in every society these women and men who are perfectly composed, always calm in the middle of a disaster, and taking care of everybody, not because they're some kind of holy presence in the profane society, but because they're the grown-ups. They're the ones that you know will make decisions that are good for you and your children. And now, as a grandfather, I'm thinking about my grandchildren all the time, figuratively and in real terms, and I want to be able to say when I'm gone, I was a good grandfather, and if I can, I want to find ways to write about that to men and women as they come into that, as they come into being grandfathers and grandmothers, just to say, don't worry so much about yourself and who's going to remember you and what you did. Just take care of the ones that are coming along, because their lives are going to be harder than yours ever was. And we've got to take care of each other and just back away from all of this noise about politics. That's not us. That's something we invented, and it's not doing a very good job on a world scale for us, that political fighting.
Well, as a grandpa, I'm sure you're going to tell them some amazing stories.
Well,
I wouldn't want to grow up.
I will tell them a few things about diving into the ice and hunting. Yeah, I will. And I love doing it,
Well, thank you
Thank
for
you.
sharing your stories in book form and with me as proxy for our viewers. I really appreciate the time that you've taken today
Thanks, Mark.
to be here.
Great. Wonderful to be here.
And that's all the time we have. You've been listening to the second part of my interview with author Barry Lopez. Our conversation was recorded at the 2019 Sun Valley Writers Conference. And my thanks to the organizers of that event for allowing us to interview some of their illuminating speakers. If you'd like to stream the first part of my discussion with Mr. Lopez or any of the interviews we've taped at the Sun Valley Writers Conference since 2005, check out our website. Just go to idahoptv.org and click on Dialogue. For Dialogue, I'm Marcia Franklin. Thanks for joining us.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore and Bettis family legacy of building the great state of Idaho. By the Friends of Idaho Public Television, by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the Idaho Public Television Endowment.